My name is Twyla Lewis. I'm 38 years old, and 2 months ago, a doctor gave me 2 months to live. So I flew home to say goodbye to my family, and I found my mom on a ventilator in the ICU, while my sister posted champagne photos from her in-laws' anniversary party. The police called what happened to my mother a burglary. The insurance company paid it like one. But here's what none of them knew: dying women read crime scenes differently. I spent 12 years as a combat engineer. I know what staged looks like. And what I found, zipped inside my mother's couch cushion, turned my last 2 months into something nobody in that family saw coming. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet strength wins in the end. If stories about standing up for the people you love speak to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. It started in an exam room in Tacoma, Washington, with me watching a doctor search for a gentle way to say pancreatic. There isn't one. Stage 4. He said the median was 2 months, that it could be 8 weeks, could be 5 if I responded to treatment. I asked for the numbers. He blinked at me, then gave them. Because I'm the kind of woman people eventually just give the numbers to. 12 years in the army will do that. I built bridges under fire and took apart things that beeped, and my whole adult life has run on one principle. If you plan well enough, you don't need anyone. So I did what I do. I opened a notebook and started a checklist for shutting down a life. Sell the truck, assign my pension, cancel the dentist, which felt almost funny. The one line I couldn't write was the phone call home. My mom, Ruth, is 71. A retired school librarian who buried my dad 3 years ago and learned to sleep alone in a house he built around her. She had already counted down one death at that kitchen table. I wasn't going to hand her a second countdown with my name on it. I decided she'd get a visit instead. A good long one, and she'd find out the truth only when the truth got loud. That was the plan. Then I noticed the thing that had been sitting wrong in my chest for days. My mother and I talk every Sunday at 4 o'clock. Her time. We have for 16 years, through 3 deployments and 2 time zones. It had been 3 Sundays in a row, and all I'd gotten was her voicemail. Understand something about me. I left Dayton at 22, and I managed my family the way I managed supply lines, from a distance, with redundancy. Sunday calls. A neighbor, Mrs. Okafor, who's lived across the street from my mother for 30 years and would notice a curtain hanging wrong. I kept the number of Mom's doctor in my phone. I mailed her a medical alert pendant 2 Christmases ago and made her promise to wear it. And she does, because she knows I check. That was my version of love. Logistics. My sister Dana, 34, stayed local and married up. A man named Grant Ashworth, whose family owns a smart home security startup called Havenlock. The kind of people who have a lake house and a family office and a Christmas card that looks like a campaign ad. When Mom stopped answering, I texted Dana. She wrote back fast and bright. Mom's fine. Church retreat, phone's off, you know how she gets. Prayer hands emoji. I read it 4 times. My mother has never once turned her phone off because my mother is afraid of missing a call from me. Short version, I didn't buy it. I called Mrs. Okafor to ask her to walk across the street, and a voice I'd never heard answered and told me I had the wrong number. I checked the contact. Same number I'd used for years. I sat with my phone in my lap and my oncologist's paperwork on the counter, and I felt the specific cold I used to feel on route clearance, when the road ahead looks fine, and every instinct you own says it isn't. I moved my flight up to the next morning. Whatever was waiting in Dayton, I was going to walk into it early. The house told me first. 3 weeks of mail jammed the box, the grass stood shin high, and my mother has never in her life let grass go 3 weeks. On the back door, a torn sticker with an insurance company logo, the kind adjusters leave when they've come and gone. I was still standing in the driveway when Mrs. Okafor came across the street with her cardigan wrapped tight, and her face did the thing faces do when they realize you don't know. They took her 3 weeks ago, sweetheart, she said. The ambulance. I thought you knew. Dana told me you were too busy to come. I don't remember the drive to St. Aldrich's. 15 minutes that exist in my head as one long red light. What I remember is the ICU. My mother. 71 years of stubborn Ohio librarian, with a tube in her throat and half her head shaved where they'd drilled to relieve the bleed. Her right wrist was casted. Her arms were purple and yellow at once, bruises layered like bad paint. Machines breathed for her in a rhythm no daughter should have to learn. I stood there doing the thing I hate most, which is nothing. A nurse came in on quiet shoes, checked a line, and looked at me longer than nurses look at strangers. Her badge said, Marisol Vega. You're the other daughter, she said. The army one. Ruth talks about you, when she can talk. Then she glanced at the door and lowered her voice like the room had ears. Your sister hasn't been in since Tuesday, she said. And in 3 weeks, you're the first person who's asked me what these injuries actually mean. The official story lived in a folder at the nurses' station. Home invasion, 3 weeks back. My mother supposedly surprised a burglar after midnight, got shoved, hit her head on the brick hearth, and lay there until Dana found her the next morning when she stopped by with breakfast. The police report listed a rear window as the entry point, a stolen television, stolen cameras, missing jewelry. The neurologist walked me through the injuries in that careful voice they teach them. Traumatic brain injury from the fall, a fractured right wrist, the kind you get when you throw your hand out to catch yourself. Then he paused on the part he clearly didn't like. Some of this bruising is older, he said. Days older. Different stages of healing. I asked what that usually means. He said, in a tone flat enough to be a second opinion all by itself, that it usually means the fall wasn't the first thing that happened to her. I went back to the folder. I read the police report twice, then a third time. The way you read a diagram that doesn't load right. My mother fought for her life on that floor for 7 hours, and the responding officer had written it up in 9 lines. No photos of the Pride window. No canvas of the neighbors. Case status: inactive, pending leads. I've filled out after-action reports with more curiosity than that. I stood in the hallway with the folder in my hands and did the math I didn't want to do. Old bruises. A woman afraid of nothing except missing my calls. A break-in with no pictures. My phone buzzed. Dana had finally texted back. Heard you're in town. We should talk. Wine? Wine. Our mother was on a ventilator and my sister was offering me a Chardonnay. I didn't wait for wine. Dana's public life is a search away, and that night the Ashworths were hosting their 40th anniversary celebration at the family estate. 40 minutes of catering trucks and valet flags. I found my sister on the back lawn in a silver dress, laughing with her mother-in-law under string lights, 3 weeks into our mother's coma. She saw me and her face did a quick, professional reset, delight snapping over panic like a lens cap. Twyla, you should have called. I said Mom looked thinner, that the doctors had questions, that I had more. Dana's husband Grant materialized the way he always does, smooth as poured concrete, hand on my shoulder like we'd ever once been friends. This family has been through so much, he said. Insurance is handling the house. The medical bills are handled. Everything's handled. I asked very evenly, who was handling Mom? And my little sister looked at me with our mother's eyes set in a stranger's face and said, we're just managing her affairs. Managing her affairs. Like Mom was a property with deferred maintenance. I asked what that meant exactly, and Grant slid a business card into my hand. Their attorney, a man named Feld. All questions through him, please. Then Dana, 2 glasses of champagne past careful, added the sentence she wasn't supposed to say. It's all legal, Twyla. Mom signed the power of attorney months ago. She wanted this. I stood on that perfect lawn with a string quartet tuning behind me, and I thought about my Sunday calls. Months of them. My mother telling me about her tomatoes, her book club, her hip. Never once, in any of those months, did she mention signing her life over to Dana. You learn something in demolition. The quieter the structure, the more you check the load paths. I smiled, thanked them, and left before they could see me start checking. I moved into my mother's house that night, dropped my duffel in my old room, and started doing the only thing that has ever calmed me down, which is looking at something carefully. The living room still wore the costume of a burglary. Drawers hung open, cushions flipped, a bookshelf swept bare. But costumes have seams. The dresser drawers had been pulled out and dumped, yet the dust lines on top of the dresser sat undisturbed. No handprints, no drag marks. Nobody had actually searched anything. The television was gone, and whoever took it had unscrewed the wall bracket, 4 screws, neatly, and set them in a cup on the mantel. Burglars do not do finished carpentry. Then the window. The report said the intruder broke the rear kitchen window to get in. I went outside with a flashlight and crouched in the flower bed my father edged with brick the summer before he died. The glass was in the mulch. Outside. You break a window coming in. The glass falls in. You break a window from the inside, standing in your own kitchen, trying to make a story. The glass falls exactly where I was kneeling. I photographed it with a ruler for scale, logged the time, and sat back on my heels in the dark, breathing slow. Somebody had built this scene, and they'd built it lazy, because they never expected an inspector. They expected grief. Grief doesn't measure glass. I was still crouched there when I noticed the small white eye above the porch light. A Havenlock camera, Grant's brand, mounted 2 years ago as a gift for Mom's safety. Its status ring blinked a soft, steady blue. Armed. Recording. Watching me right then and sending everything it saw to somebody who was not me. Here's what you should know about those cameras. Grant installed them himself 2 Christmases ago, made a show of it, drilled and leveled and talked about protecting family. The account sat in my mother's name because the subscription billed to her card, but the administrator, the one login that could see everything and delete anything, belonged to Grant. I knew the platform. Home security is half my civilian job, hardening systems for utilities, and Havenlock's cloud is built like most of them, footage synced to servers, activity logged. I signed into Mom's account because I'm the one who set up her recovery email in the first place, back when I was managing my family like a supply line. The camera history was right there, tidy as a bank statement. Every quiet evening, every porch delivery, weeks and weeks of a widow's small life. Except the night that mattered. The night of the burglary, the record simply stopped at 11:58 and didn't pick up again until 6:41 the next morning. Nearly 7 hours of nothing, clean as a splice. Cameras fail sometimes, storms happen. But down in the account's activity log, in gray letters nobody expects a grieving family to read, the system had kept its own diary. Manual deletion. 4 cameras. Executed by the administrator account at 1:12 a.m., while my mother was bleeding on the floor beneath one of them. Whoever wiped that footage was thorough about the video and careless about the ledger because deletion logs don't delete themselves. I sat at my mother's kitchen table, in the house dressed up as a crime scene, and I felt something in me go very calm and very cold at the same time. Deletion isn't destruction. It's just a promise, and most people have no idea how hard that promise is to keep. The next evening, my mother woke up. Not all the way, not for long. The ventilator had come out that morning, and her voice was a paper version of itself. I was reading in the chair beside her bed when her casted hand moved, and her eyes found me, and for 1 second every machine in that room went quiet in my head. "You came home," she whispered. I said, "Of course I did." I said, "I'm here, Mama. I've got you. All the things you say." Her fingers curled around mine with surprising strength, the grip of a woman who once hauled a box of encyclopedias up a ladder because no student of hers was going without. And then her eyes changed. They went past me to the door, checked it, actually checked the door, and she pulled me down close, and what she said was not what I expected. "Don't tell Dana," she breathed. "Please, don't tell Dana," I asked. "Don't tell Dana what, Mama?" But she was already sliding under again, her monitor resuming its steady account of her heart, her secret going down with her. I stood over her bed for a long time. My mother had woken from 3 weeks in the dark, with 1 sentence's worth of strength in her whole body, and she had spent it on fear. And the person she was afraid of was not a burglar. A burglar, you'd say, lock the doors. A stranger, you'd say, they had a gun. My mother said a name, and the name was her own daughter's. I walked out past the nurse's station. Past Marisol, who read my face and let me go, and I stood in the parking garage doing arithmetic. The doctors had given me 8 weeks, maybe a little more. These people had no idea what a combat engineer can build in 8 weeks. My father's workshop still smelled like him, machine oil and sawdust and patience. He ran a machine shop his whole life, sold it 3 years ago for a little over $700,000, and died of a heart attack 4 months into retirement, which is the kind of joke God tells in Ohio. His pegboard still had the outline of every tool drawn in marker. I cleared his workbench and built what I know how to build: a timeline, photos of the glass, the dresser, the bracket screws, printed at the drugstore and pinned in order. The deletion log, 1:12 a.m., the police reports 9 indifferent lines. Red string, because red string works. I stood back and looked at it the way I used to look at a bridge before I certified it, load by load. Rule 1 from 12 years of route clearance. 1 operator, fewer leaks. Nobody knew what I had, so nobody could get ahead of it. That included my diagnosis, which was nobody's business, and it included the clinical trial coordinator in Seattle who had left me 2 voicemails about an intake appointment I kept not scheduling. A trial slot was the one card medicine had left to deal me, maybe a few extra months. I let it ride. I told myself I'd call Thursday. There was too much to do here, and I work alone, and that has always been the whole architecture of me. I was labeling the folder on the wire transfers I hadn't found yet when my phone lit up with a number I didn't know. A woman's voice, warm as a banker's lobby. "Ms. Lewis? I'm calling from the Ashworth family office. Richard would love to have you over for coffee." "Just family," she said. "Just family." I looked at my wall of string and said I'd be delighted. If you've ever gotten one phone call that split your life into before and after, then you know why I couldn't sleep that night. Stay with me. Because what I found in my mother's bank statements is the part nobody in my family wanted anyone to see. If you believe mothers deserve better than this, tap subscribe, so I know you're walking the rest of this road with me. Coffee at the Ashworth estate is a performance with a beverage attached. Richard Ashworth, 64, silver where it counts, received me in a study with leather chairs older than my career and asked about my health with his head tilted just so. I gave him nothing. He praised my mother, praised my service, and then, gently, the way a man adjusts a thermostat, suggested I must be exhausted, that Tacoma must miss me, that family was for leaning on, and the family had this handled. "Grant will run you to the airport himself," he said, "whenever you're ready." I smiled and said I hadn't picked a date. On the drive back to my mother's house, I replayed every sentence, because men like Richard don't make small talk. They make surveys. He'd been mapping what I knew. Fine. At the kitchen table, I opened Mom's Havenlock account again to pull the deletion log into my files, and the app did something the Ashworths would have hated. It showed me the device list. 4 cameras at my mother's address, one of them offline since the burglary, listed on the police report as stolen. Except the device wasn't gone from the account. It was online. Live, that very minute, streaming a wide, clean view of a boathouse, a dock, a lake going silver in the afternoon light. I knew that dock from Dana's Instagram. The Ashworth Lake House. The camera my family reported stolen, the one an insurance company had paid my mother for, was screwed to a wall 40 miles away, faithfully recording the people who took it. They hadn't even bothered to wipe it and start over. Why would they? Nobody checks a dead woman's app. I poured myself my father's bourbon and toasted the little blinking light. "Sloppy," I told it. "Stay sloppy." My father kept paper. Thank God, the man kept paper. A fireproof cabinet in the workshop held 30 years of the Lewis family in manila folders, and in the drawer marked Ruth, I found the bank statements because Mom never switched to paperless. She likes envelopes. I spread 5 months of them across the workbench, and the story told itself in 3 lines of ink. 3 wire transfers, $90,000 in September, $110,000 in November, $100,000 in December, $300,000, moved out of my mother's savings. The machine shop money my father bled for. Each transfer authorized under the power of attorney, and each one sent to the same place, something called AL Bridge Holdings LLC. I'd never heard of it. The internet barely had either. No website, no address, a registered agent behind a filing service. But the internet had plenty to say about Havenlock. Tech Press, 8 months back. Gushing about expansion. Tech Press, 2 months back. Quieter, mentioning burn rate and a make-or-break Series C round, closing at their big product launch. A funding round, closing at the launch. A mother-in-law's savings, draining in the exact same season. I sat there listening to the shop clock my father never fixed, running 2 ticks slow, and I added the last number in. The insurance claim for the burglary, which I'd found on the adjuster's sticker paperwork. $38,000, paid out for a television and jewelry and cameras, one of which was presently enjoying lake views on my phone. Fraud stacked on my mother's skull. Underneath the last statement, at the bottom of the drawer, I found an envelope. Mom's handwriting, shaky, addressed to my Twyla, and under the name, If Something Ever. That's where it stopped. If something ever. She never got to finish the sentence, and I put it in my breast pocket and kept it there, unfinished, like a fuse. I ran into Dana at the hospital that Thursday, 11 at night, and for once, nobody had staged anything. She was alone on a hallway bench outside the ICU, heels off, feet bare on the tile, mascara gone to smoke under her eyes. She looked 14 again. She looked like the kid who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. I sat down, and we watched the vending machine hum for a while, and then she said, "You think I don't love her?" It wasn't a question, so I didn't answer it. "You left," she said. "You got to leave. You got the army and the medals and the clean exit, and I stayed. And staying has a price, Twyla. You have no idea what it costs to keep a seat at that table." Her voice didn't rise. That's what scared me. It was the flat voice of somebody doing math they've done 1,000 times. I could have said, "Our mother is behind that door with a hole drilled in her head. Tell me about cost." I didn't. I asked one question instead. Quiet. No blade showing. "Where were you that night, Dana?" And my sister, who used to sing to herself when she was scared, who sang through Dad's whole funeral under her breath, looked at the vending machine and said, "Cincinnati." We were in Cincinnati. There's a hotel receipt. Here's the thing about people who answer a question you didn't ask. She'd skipped straight to the receipt. I said, "Okay." I said, "Get some sleep." I rode the elevator down doing the coldest thing I know how to do, which is believing what I see, instead of what I love. My baby sister had an alibi ready, rehearsed. And some part of her, some buried 14-year-old part, was singing scared underneath it. I told everyone I was getting the house ready for Mom to come home. It was even half true. Saturday morning, I started on the living room, put the books back, righted the drawers, unzipped the sofa cushions to wash the covers, because my mother would rise from her own grave to wash those covers if I didn't. My hand hit something hard inside the middle cushion. Sewn-in springs, I thought. Then I pulled the zipper the rest of the way, and there it was, buried in the foam, like a body. Her medical alert pendant. The one I mailed her 2 Christmases ago. The one she promised to wear, and did wear, every day, because she knew I checked. Somebody had zipped it inside a couch cushion, and when I turned it over, the back plate was open and the battery was gone. Not dead. Gone. Removed. I sat down on the bare floor of my mother's living room and held that little gray button in my palm and understood the whole night in one piece. She reached for it. At some point, that night or before it, my mother reached for the one lifeline her paranoid soldier daughter had given her, and it was already silent because someone in her own family had opened it up beforehand and taken out its voice. The burglary was improvised. The pendant was planned. Whoever did this had walked through my mother's house before that night, thinking about what could call for help, and quietly strangled it in advance. I don't have good words for what happened in my chest on that floor. The fury I'd been carrying since the ICU went somewhere different. It stopped boiling. It set, the way concrete sets. I put the pendant on a cord and wore it around my wrist from that morning on. Battery slot empty. Like a watch that tells only one time. My body picked that week to send its bill. I was walking the ICU corridor with a folder of discharge planning questions when the floor tilted like a ship, and the pain I'd been managing with willpower and prescription paper went from a 6 to a number I hadn't met yet. I made it to the wall. Mostly. The next thing I knew, Marisol Vega had me in a chair with her fingers on my pulse and her eyes on my face, and she wasn't looking at me like a visitor anymore. She was looking at me like inventory. "I've seen that kind of thin before," she said quietly. "And I've seen the way you fold your arm over your middle when you stand up. Does your family know?" I said there was nothing to know. She let that sit between us, one professional to another, both of us fluent in the language of people who won't lie down. Then she didn't push, which is how I knew she was good. She wrote her personal cell number on a supply slip and tucked it into my folder. "For when the nothing gets heavy," she said, and walked back to her shift. In the parking garage, my phone showed a voicemail from Seattle, the trial coordinator, patient as a metronome. "Ms. Lewis, we need your intake scheduled by Friday, or we have to release your slot to the next candidate. The slot closes Friday. Call me back, Twyla. Please." She'd stopped saying Ms. Lewis by the end of it. I sat in my mother's car with my hands on the wheel, the pendant on my wrist, the folder on the seat. One door marked more time and one door marked her, and I did not have the tools to hold both open. Friday was 5 days away. Monday, I bought an hour with an elder law attorney, a tired, sharp woman named Prue Callahan who has seen every version of this movie. I laid it out. She listened with her pen down, which lawyers only do when it's bad. "The power of attorney looks valid on its face," she said. "Notarized, witnessed, months old. You can challenge it, undue influence, capacity, and you might even win. In 8 months. Maybe 12. I said my mother might not have 8 months. I didn't say that I definitely didn't. Then she slid a printout across the desk and made it worse. "Your sister filed a guardianship petition last week. If the court appoints Dana as your mother's legal guardian, every decision, medical, financial, residential, runs through her, permanently, and your challenge dies on the vine. Hearings in 3 weeks." I asked what stops them from emptying the accounts in the meantime, and she gave me the honest answer, which is paperwork and hope. "Courts are careful, Ms. Lewis," she said, "and careful means slow." Meanwhile, Havenlock's funding round was closing in 2 weeks at that launch event, tech press counting down like it was a rocket. Money moves at wire speed. Justice moves at docket speed. Anyone who tells you the system protects the vulnerable has never raced it against a bank transfer. I stood to go, and Prue Callahan looked at my wrist, at the little gray pendant on its cord, for a beat longer than politeness. Then she said the sentence I'd flown 2,000 miles to hear somebody finally say out loud. "Paper beats blood, Ms. Lewis. Every day of the week. Unless you walk in here with something paper can't argue with." That night, I stood in the workshop a long time, looking at my wall of string, my one operator masterpiece, and I heard my own rule in my own voice: fewer leaks. And for the first time in my adult life, it sounded less like doctrine and more like a woman hiding. 12 years I'd run missions with teams I trusted with my spine. Somewhere between the army and the diagnosis, I'd decided love was a thing you do to people from a distance, solo, so nobody sees you need. My mother reached for a pendant and got silence. I had a phone full of numbers and was choosing the same silence on purpose, so I did the hardest thing in this whole story. Harder than the glass, harder than what came later. I asked for help. Tuesday morning, my mother's kitchen table held coffee for 4. Mrs. Okafor, who it turns out had been awake at 12:40 that night because her terrier lost his mind at a moving van, at my mother's curb. 40 minutes after midnight. Marisol, off shift, who confirmed what the charting already whispered, bruising in different stages, days apart, and who knew exactly which hospital social worker files reports that actually move, and Hal Brennan, 67, my father's oldest friend, 30 years working financial crimes for the county before he retired to a base boat. Hal walked my wall of string twice with his reading glasses up in his hair. "Your daddy built engines," he said finally. "You build cases." Then he tapped the folder on Ailbridge Holdings and smiled the way old cops smile when the world holds still and shows itself. "Registered agents of filing service," he said, "but the organizer on the original paperwork, that's Feld." The Ashworth's own lawyer couldn't even be bothered to launder the shell with a stranger's name. The lake house camera was the door I'd left propped open, and that week, I finally walked through it properly. It still lived on my mother's account, which meant its archive settings were my mother's archive settings, which meant everything it recorded synced to her cloud storage on a schedule Grant had never bothered to check. Because who audits a dead woman's app? Most of what it held was nothing. Ducks, sunsets. But cloud systems are like sediment. Things settle in layers, and when the deletion order went out at 1:12 that morning, it propagated device by device. The lake camera was last in line, offline half the night on bad rural Wi-Fi, and before the order reached it, it had already synced one final fragment from the mesh network's shared buffer, tagged with the home system's ID and stamped 12:07 a.m. 9 seconds. I sat in the workshop at 2 in the morning wearing my father's old headphones, and I played those 9 seconds maybe 50 times. My mother's voice, high and shaking. "This is my house." A man's voice, low, clipped. Grant's voice, saying her name like a warning, a crash of something heavy. And then my sister, my baby sister, screaming. She fell. Oh God, she fell. In a tone no receipt from any hotel in Cincinnati could survive. 9 seconds. It didn't show the shove. A defense lawyer would say so, loudly. But it put both of them inside that house at 12:07 on the night they swore under oath to responding officers that they were 100 miles away, and it put my mother alive and begging while they were there. People have been convicted on less. Bridges have been built on less. I backed it up 4 ways, and then I sat very still in my dead father's chair, listening to my mother say my house, until the sun came up. They came to me on a Wednesday, which I appreciated, because it meant somebody at the bank had talked. I'd been in twice that week, asking the questions account holders' daughters ask. Grant arrived at my mother's door with the lawyer Feld and a bakery box, which is the Ashworth idea of camouflage. "We're concerned about you," Grant said, sitting in my mother's kitchen like he was appraising it. "Alone in this house. Under stress." And then Feld opened a leather folder and I watched my secret walk out of it. "It's our understanding," Feld said, "that you've recently received a serious diagnosis. Palliative-level prescriptions. Opioids." He said the word opioids, the way you'd set a knife on a table. No threat at all, just letting it catch the light. Grant leaned in with his best boardroom sorrow. "Our thoughts are with you, Twyla, truly. But you can see how this looks. A very sick woman, on heavy medication, making wild accusations against a grieving family. If it came to a courtroom, a judge would have to weigh your," he paused, "choosing it, condition." I looked at the bakery box on my mother's table. Somewhere in a system built to protect patients, a billing code or a pharmacy record or a helpful acquaintance had sold me out, and now the one thing I'd hidden to spare my mother was a weapon pointed at the only witness account that mattered, mine. They let themselves out. The next morning's mail brought the follow-through, a motion from the guardianship case. Dana's attorneys had requested an expedited emergency hearing, first docket available, citing interference by an estranged relative whose medical circumstances and psychological state raise urgent questions. The clerk's stamp set the date. 4 days after the Havenlock launch? They had synchronized their clocks. The court would hand them my mother the same week the escrow handed them her money, and I would be a diagnosis in a folder. The social worker's report did its job, and Adult Protective Services opened a file, and a caseworker named Ms. Danvers came to interview my mother on a gray Tuesday. I wasn't allowed in the room, which is proper, and I stood at the hallway window like a soldier outside a chapel, watching the only witness who saw everything decide what to do with it. My mother was 3 weeks stronger by then. Sitting up. Sentences mostly whole. Ms. Danvers was kind and slow and exact, and through the glass I watched her ask the question, and I watched my mother look at the door first. The same door check as that first night. Then Ruth Lewis, who taught 2 generations of this town to look things up before repeating them, folded the edge of her blanket with her good hand and said, "I fell. I'm clumsy. It's my hip." I read her lips on the last part because I'd heard the lie rehearsed in every phone call where something hummed behind her voice. Ms. Danvers wrote it down, because that's the job. The file would stay open, but files that stay open don't stop wire transfers. In the hallway afterward, I pressed my back against the wall and made myself think instead of feel, and the thinking arrived somewhere that hurt worse than the feeling. Don't tell Dana. I'd carried that sentence for weeks, assuming my mother was afraid of her daughter. Standing at that window, I finally heard it right. She wasn't afraid of Dana. She was afraid for her. She'd woken up from a drilled skull protecting the child who let it happen, because that is what mothers are. They are people who keep paying a bill nobody sent them. She would take this to her grave to keep Dana out of a courtroom, which meant the truth was going to need a witness who had nothing left to protect. My mother lied to protect the daughter who hurt her. Sit with that for a second because I had to. If you're still here, it's because you know a family like this, or you survived one. Comment the word "stay" if you've ever protected someone who didn't deserve it. And subscribe, because what I did that Friday, instead of saving my own life, is the part I need you to witness. Friday came the way Fridays do, on time and without mercy. The Seattle coordinator called at 1 o'clock my time, and I let it ring through, and her voicemail was short and stripped of script. "The slot closes today, Twyla. 5 o'clock, your time. There's a red-eye out of Dayton tonight. Get on the plane." I spent the afternoon with my mother. We didn't talk about anything. I read to her from a paperback western off the hospital cart, and she drifted, and her monitor kept its steady books. And at 4 o'clock, I went down to the parking garage and sat in her car where I could fall apart with the doors closed if it came to that. It didn't come to that. I'm an engineer. I ran it like a load calculation because that's the only prayer I know. The trial was a maybe. Months, not years. Odds a betting man would walk past. The launch was in 6 days. The hearing in 10. If I flew west tonight, I'd spend my maybe in a hospital bed 2,000 miles from this one, extending a life whose entire remaining point was sitting up on the 4th floor, learning to hold a fork again. The pendant hung on my wrist, one gray eye, no battery. My mother reached for help once, and the help had been gutted in advance. I was the help now. You don't leave your post to go buy yourself more calendar. At 4:58, I watched the dashboard clock, and at 5 o'clock straight up, I felt the door close somewhere over the Rockies, quiet as a checkbook. Some doors you don't slam. You just let them click. Then I picked up the phone, and I did not call Seattle. I called Hal Brennan. "Teach me how a case dies in court," I said, "because mine isn't going to." Hal turned my father's workshop into a war room with 2 folding chairs and 40 years of habit. We built it in 3 lanes, the way he'd charged cases his whole career. Lane 1, the money. A power of attorney is not a skeleton key. An agent can't move the principal's savings into her own family's company. That's self-dealing, conversion, 3 wires, $300,000, paper trail straight through Ale Bridge Holdings into Havenlock's bridge financing, organized by the family's own lawyer. Lane 2, the insurance. A $38,000 claim for stolen property, one item of which was streaming lake views from the Ashworth's boathouse on the victim's own account, serial number and device ID matching the claim sheet line for line, which is the kind of exhibit adjusters frame and hang on the wall. Lane 3, the night itself. The deletion log at 1:12, Mrs. Okafor's van at 12:40, 9 seconds at 12:07 that put both sworn Cincinnati alibis inside the house with my mother begging. Hal sat back and looked at the whole board, and then he gave me the gift only an old cop gives. The whole. "It's good," he said. "It's real. And their lawyer will burn it down with a single match. Motive. You're the estranged daughter who blew back into town with weeks to live, and every piece of this points the estate away from your sister and toward you." Dying woman grabs the money on her way out. That's the story they'll tell. And juries like stories better than logs. He was right. And I'd known it for days. And I'd been circling the only exit there was. Everything I touched was contaminated by what I stood to inherit. Unless I stood to inherit nothing. I looked at Hal for a long moment. Then I'll stop being an heir, I said. Here is the arithmetic they were counting on, the whole scheme in 4 sentences. Havenlock Series C closed at 6 p.m. on launch day, escrow releasing the moment the round finalized, and my mother's $300,000, already converted into a bridge note, would dissolve into the capital stack behind layers of counsel and become, for all practical purposes, unrecoverable in any time frame that included the rest of her life. The guardianship hearing sat 4 days after that, where a well-dressed Dana would be appointed to manage whatever was left. The court could not move before the money. The money could not be touched without the court. That was the design, and it was a good design, and the men who built it had every reason to sleep well. Except for one mechanism they'd never had pointed at them. Hal laid it out at the workbench like a field-stripped rifle. Banks, he said, are the one animal in this jungle faster than a wire. Every teller in Ohio trains on elder financial exploitation. A bank's fraud unit can place a hold on a suspicious disbursement on its own authority. Same day, no judge, pending review, if, and it's a real if, the referral is live. An open APS case. A sworn affidavit from somebody with first-hand knowledge. An emergency protective order gets you from hold to frozen. I asked how long a hold takes if the referral lands clean. He said, minutes. I looked at the calendar over my father's bench. Launch day circled in his old red grease pencil, and the shape of the thing finally stood up in front of me. I didn't need to win in court before 6 p.m. on launch day. I needed one bank officer on one recorded line to believe one dying woman for about 47 minutes. Richard Ashworth summoned me one last time, 2 days before the launch, and I went. Because you always walk the ground before the operation. The study again. The leather again. This time a folder sat on the low table between us, square to the table's edge, and Richard poured coffee like a man with all the time in the world. Somebody has to manage these things, he said, almost kindly. Your mother's generation didn't plan. Ours does. Then he opened the folder and laid the plan out, piece by piece, and I will grant him this. It was beautiful. A care trust for Ruth. Funded for life, private nursing, the house repaired, restitution of the full 300,000. Structured, of course. And for you, he said, and here his voice found a warmth I believe was real. There's a trial in Houston. Phase 2. Promising. Enrollment closed. Except these things have doors, and I know the man who holds them. We would cover everything. He let it sit. In exchange, a signature. Non-disclosure, non-disparagement, withdrawal of my statements to the bank and the county, and no objection at the guardianship hearing. Dana keeps her seat. The company closes its round. And you, Twyla, get to die in peace, somewhere warm, with your mother provided for, forever. That's not a small thing I'm offering you, he said. I'm offering you a good ending. The pen lay on the folder, brushed gold, heavy enough to feel like a decision. And God help me, I looked at it. Whatever they tell you about principles, when a man offers you your mother's safety and your own extra spring in the same sentence, you look. My hand was flat on that walnut table, 6 inches from the pen, and Richard watched it the way an investor watches a chart, and neither one of us moved. I told him I'd sleep on it, and he said, of course, take 2 days, and I drove to the hospital and sat with my mother while the ward went quiet around us. She was lucid that night, more than she'd been since the ICU, propped up with her hair growing back in silver bristle where they'd shaved it. We talked about nothing. Dad's shop clock, still 2 ticks slow, her tomatoes, which Mrs. Okafor was watering. And then, out of the drift, she said, Dana used to sing when she was scared. Did you know that? All those thunderstorms? She still does it, I'd bet. Only quieter now. I said I remembered. She looked at the window a while, at the parking lot light making a small moon in the glass, and she found my hand without looking, and she said it again, the sentence from the first night. You came home, like she was filing it somewhere safe. And sitting there, holding the good hand of the bravest person I know, the whole Ashworth folder finally showed me its real number, the one printed nowhere. The trust would pay her bills forever, and she would live under Dana's guardianship, in the reach of that family, checked on by the people who unscrewed her cameras, till the end of her days, safe the way a deposit is safe. They weren't offering to give my mother back. They were offering to store her. Money would move, papers would sign, and Ruth Lewis would remain what she'd become on their books years ago. An asset with a care plan. I bent and kissed her knuckles. You can't inherit a person, I said, mostly to myself. My mother, half asleep, squeezed my fingers like she'd heard the whole argument and was signing off on the verdict. By the time I reached the parking garage, I had already drafted the refusal in my head. No terms. The price came first. That's how I knew it was the right door. Real ones bill you at the entrance. Wednesday morning, launch eve, I sat in Prue Callahan's office and signed a disclaimer of interest, notarized, irrevocable, renouncing any inheritance from the estate of Ruth Lewis, present or future, every dollar, the house, my father's machine shop money, all of it, gone from my future like a limb. Prue read me the warnings twice, as she should. Then I swore out the affidavit for Adult Protective Services, and on page 1, where it asks the witness to state any interest in the matter, I attached the thing I'd guarded like a wound, my diagnosis, staging, prognosis, the whole file. Let them read it. A woman with a terminal diagnosis and a signed disclaimer cannot profit from any of this, cannot outlive probate, cannot be bought, which meant that for the first time in this whole rotten season, the cheapest explanation for my testimony was that it was true. They'd tried to make my dying a credibility problem. Fine. I'd make it the one credential they couldn't argue with. Hal walked the sealed package to his old task force that afternoon. Wire records, device logs, the claim sheet, the 9 seconds, Okafor's statement, Marisol's charting summary, my affidavit on top like a cover letter from the far side of the river, and I sent Feld a single text, which I am told reached Richard mid-dinner. No terms. Tell Richard the ending isn't his to offer. Thursday morning, launch day, a judge signed the emergency protective order over my mother's accounts at 9:40 a.m. The last disbursement to escrow was scheduled out of her bank for 5:34 p.m. The launch doors opened at 4. My window was 47 minutes wide, and I intended to leave most of it unspent. Launch day, and every camera in the city pointed at the Ashworths, which suited me because I was in a hospital room with the blinds half drawn, and no story about my family was ever going to end on their stage. Room 314, 4:47 in the afternoon. My mother sat propped against her pillows, and I'd told her only that I had a call to make, and I wanted to make it holding her hand, and she'd looked at me the way librarians look at a girl who's finally about to return something long overdue, and said nothing at all. The phone lay on the blanket between us. Hal had built the bridge that morning, a conference line, his old task force contact on one leg, the fraud unit of my mother's bank on the other, everyone on a recorded line, everyone warned I was coming. I pressed the button. Then I did the thing I have trained my whole life to do, which is speak clearly under fire. My name is Twyla Lewis. I am the daughter of Ruth Lewis, and I hold no financial interest in her estate. Disclaimer on file. I'm calling to report active financial exploitation of an elder. And I read it out like coordinates, account number, the county APS case number, the protective order signed at 9:40 that morning, docket stamp, the 3 wires, dates and amounts, 90, 110, 100, the LLC, the escrow. The transfer executes at 5:34, I said. You have 47 minutes to hold it. Keys clicked 2 states away. A supervisor came on, asked me to verify the order number, and I did. And then the line went to hold music, thin piano, while the machines kept my mother's steady time and her thumb moved back and forth across my knuckles, once for every year I'd been gone. it felt like. I watched the clock hand crawl. 5:06, 5:08. The piano cut off mid-phrase. The supervisor's voice came back level and certain, the loveliest sound I have ever heard indoors. Ms. Lewis, the disbursement is held, pending review. Nothing releases from these accounts today. 5:09 p.m., I thanked her, ended the call, and set the phone face down on the blanket. My mother looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us said a word about banks. Across town, the lights were just coming up on the stage. I watched it later, the way everyone did, because the launch was streamed live and the internet keeps what it's given. Richard walked out at 5 sharp to real applause, silver and certain under the lights, in front of a screen 4 stories tall, reading Havenlock, "Your family, always protected." You have to admire the sentence. It was the family motto in every direction. For 20 minutes, it was a good show. Demos, promises, a video of a grandmother sleeping safe under their little blinking cameras, and I sat on my mother's bed, watching investors smile in the front row. Then 5:34 came, and somewhere below that stage, in the quiet country where money actually lives, a wire did not move. I know now what the stream couldn't see. The escrow agent refreshed a screen and found a compliance hold, Elder Financial Exploitation Review, on the account feeding the family's portion of the round. Escrow agents do not negotiate, they notify. By 5:40, the lead investors' counsel, mid-due diligence, had the flag, and stapled to the flag came the county's referral packet, which Hal's old unit had transmitted that afternoon. The wires, the claim sheet with a device currently streaming from the seller's own boathouse, a deletion log stamped 1:12 a.m., and 9 seconds of audio from a Night 2 sworn statement said, "Nobody was home." Term sheets have a clause for material adverse events. Fraud in the family that founded the company qualifies. At 5:51 on the live stream, a man I now know was the CFO walked onto the stage mid-sentence, whispered into Richard's ear, and the camera caught the exact moment 64 years of certainty recalculated. Richard smiled at the room and said there'd be a brief delay in the financing announcement. There wasn't. There was no financing announcement, that night or ever, because the lead pulled before midnight and money is a bird. One clap and the whole flock goes. The stream ended early. The tech press wrote what tech presses write. Sources say. Questions swirl. I sat in room 314 with the sound off by then, watching my mother sleep, and I said the quiet part to the dark window and the city lights behind it. For months you told everyone you were just managing her affairs. The bank is managing yours now. My phone rang at 11 that night. Dana. I stepped into the hallway and answered. And there was wind in it. She was outside somewhere, away from the venue, away from them, and her voice had finally cracked all the way through the finish. "You destroyed us," she said. "Do you understand what you did tonight? They're in there with lawyers, Twyla. Lawyers for the company, lawyers for the family, and Grant keeps looking at me like..." She stopped. "Like he's deciding something," she said, smaller. I stood under the hallway lights where I'd once read our mother's chart through a window, and I kept my voice where I keep it. "No," I said. "I didn't destroy anything. I stopped the bleeding. There's a difference. Ask Mom." She made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, the sound of a woman standing in the wreckage of the only table she'd ever been given a seat at. "It was Grant," she said, and then stopped herself, years of training slamming shut. And I let the silence hold, because I had one sentence for my sister, and it needed room. "Dana, you can't inherit a person. Wind and her breathing and a whole city of night between us. They're going to need someone to blame by morning," I said. "Their lawyers are already drawing the short straw, and sweetheart, it's you. It was always going to be you. That's what your seat at that table was for. So tell the truth first. Call Hal's people tonight, before Grant sells you at sunrise." She didn't answer. But she didn't hang up either, and in the quiet I heard it. So faint I might have invented it, except I know I didn't, because I'd heard it through a bedroom wall during every thunderstorm of my childhood. Humming. Barely anything. Dana was scared, and Dana was singing. "Sing if you have to," I said gently, and I ended the call, and stood there a long time with my hand flat against the window of the world and let my sister make the only choice that was ever truly hers. There was one bill left, and it came due in the morning when the story broke with my affidavit in the public file, which meant my diagnosis was now a fact in the world, which meant my mother was going to hear it from a newspaper, or from me. I'd faced easier doors wearing body armor. I came in with coffee she wasn't allowed to drink and sat on the edge of the bed, and she took one look at my face and put down her juice, because mothers read rooms for a living. I took the pendant off my wrist. I opened the little back plate, and I set the battery in, the one I'd bought weeks ago and carried like a coin, and the gray button woke up with a green blink, and I laid it in her palm and closed her fingers over it. Then I told her. All of it. The exam room in Tacoma, the numbers, the 2 months that had already spent themselves down to weeks. The trial I let go, and why. I had built that speech in my head for a month, engineered it, load tested every sentence, and none of it survived contact. It never does. What happened instead was my mother, 71 years old, with a healing skull and a casted wrist, pulled my head down onto her shoulder with her good arm the way she did when I was 6 and the world was a scraped knee. She didn't fall apart. She ran her thumb along my hairline, and she was quiet for a while, and when she finally spoke, her voice was the steadiest thing in that building. "Then we don't waste a single day," she said. "That's all. No speech back." I had spent 16 years being the one who handles things, and I sat there and let myself be handled. And somewhere in the middle of it, I understood that this, not the bank, not the launch, this was the mission I'd actually flown home for, and I'd almost managed my way straight past it. 6 weeks have passed since the launch that wasn't. The math shook out the way real math does, unevenly, and I'll give it to you straight. Dana sang. She called Hal's people that same night from a parking garage and traded truth for daylight. The shove she watched Grant give our mother at the top of that argument. The panic. The staging after. The pendant he'd emptied 2 days earlier because Mom kept threatening to call me. The alibi they built on the drive home from a hotel they checked into after. Her cooperation bought her a plea. Probation, restitution, and a divorce filing. She submitted herself. Which might be the first thing she signed in 5 years that nobody handed her. Grant was arrested 8 days after the launch. Felonious assault, insurance fraud, tampering with records, obstruction. His lawyers are good, and it doesn't matter the way he needs it to, because the 9 seconds exist and juries have ears. Richard was never handcuffed. Men like Richard aren't. He resigned, settled with the state over the fund transfers, watched Havenlock sell for parts to a competitor who kept the cameras and dropped the name. The world that made him is still out there, running other families like balance sheets. I don't pretend otherwise. But it's running without my mother in the portfolio. Her money came back by court order. All of it. Plus the clawed-back insurance claim. The guardianship petition died, and the court appointed a professional fiduciary, a brisk woman with a caseload and no last name we share, which is exactly the point. And Mom came home, to her own house, her own kitchen, a day nurse, and Marisol, who visits Sundays and lost the coin toss over the tomatoes. Me? I'm past the far edge of my 2 months now. Doctors are engineers of averages, and I have always tested above spec. I'm still dying. I want to be honest with you. This isn't that kind of story. I'm just not done living, and it turns out those are different schedules entirely. It's early spring in Ohio now, the kind of morning my father used to call good pouring weather. I'm on the porch in the wheelchair I finally stopped arguing about, and my mother, Ruth Lewis, 71, hip and skull and stubbornness all knitting, is pushing me down the brick walk she watched him lay, one careful row at a time, 40 years ago. The pendant rides at her collarbone, green light blinking its steady all clear battery snug where it belongs. Mrs. Okafor waves from her flower bed like we're a parade, and through the kitchen window behind us, over the sound of running water, I can hear my sister washing cups, and underneath the water, quietly, she's singing. Dana comes Tuesdays and Thursdays. We are not healed. That word is too big and too fast. We are at the table, which is where healing eats. I used to think coming home was a mission, an objective you secure and hand off and fly away from. And for 16 years, I ran my family like a supply line and called the distance love. 16 years, 3 deployments, 1 diagnosis, and 47 minutes taught me otherwise. My mother stops the chair in the sun and rests her hand on my shoulder, and I put my hand over hers, and I don't say a word, because for once, there's nothing to manage. I came home. Here's what I know now, and it's the only wisdom I have left to leave anywhere. You can't inherit a person. You can only show up for one, while there's still time to be counted. That's my story. 1 phone call, 47 minutes, and a battery, put back where it belonged. If this reminded you to check on your mother, or to look closer at who holds her paperwork, take that as a sign and do it today. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share this video with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.